Hello everyone and welcome to episode 108 of The Sydneyist, the best radio show in Sydney, on Sydney, or so we like to think. I'm Elizabeth Farrelly, broadcasting from the Ellen Slate studio at Eastside Radio on 89.7 FM or streaming on eastsidefm.org. Tonight we're talking landscape architecture, but not in the way that you think, probably. It's what I like to think of as guerrilla gardening, but this is going to be a controversial term for tonight because we're going to talk about why that's unacceptable, much as I like it. Patrick Franklyn is my guest. I'm very excited. He's come to us actually as a bit of a fan of the show, which is lovely. We love fans. He's a landscape architect who has also been involved, I should say, in one of my election campaigns, so thank you, Patrick. But more importantly, he is very engaged with this thing that we're not calling guerrilla gardening. What are we calling it, Patrick?
Hi, Elizabeth. Lovely to be here. Guerrilla gardening is an act of cultivating plants on land without the owner's permission.
Yes, I know.
Often in abandoned or neglected public spaces.
Yeah.
So let's make up a name. So I'm going to call what I do something like gentle DDD, and I'm partly stealing from your terrific episode a couple of weeks ago about gentle density.
Yes.
But DDD is something I sometimes use, which would stand for density, duration, and diversity.
Okay.
So I suppose the best place I've been able to personally enact that is in our local street. And our local street's about 150 metres long. It's got about 40, I counted them the other day for this show, 40 little patches of land. The longest one's about 11 metres. The shortest one's about 3 metres. It's a narrow street. We're in Tamarama. It's the densest suburb layout in Australia. Originally.
Is it?
It is. There's a little stat about
originally.
that. Originally, not now.
Yeah.
But originally. So it's tight. And good old COVID, we had a bit of time in our hands then, and one could look out and see the opportunity is one word, or what this street needed. And this street needed anything called vegetation. It had one dying tree and a lot of rather proudly mown lawns, tiny little patches, because there's a lot of cars, both perpendicular and parallel, parked. And I say that really specifically because that makes a difference, and there's power lines on one side. And that
makes a difference, yes.
So
when you say 30 or 40 patches of land, do you mean people's front lawns?
Yeah, we've got people's little front lawns. They are really patches in this street. It's Illawong Avenue in Tamarama. So they are small. So what could we do to add ecology, which was something I was keen on. And
I like that, add ecology. Yes.
Well,
bring your own ecology. Yes.
Yeah, I'm quite a believer in taking your own agency, I suppose, and what one can do. I don't think councils have, they need support and don't have all the resources yet. As a landscape architect, I'm quite aware, because I teach into it, of the needs, perhaps in the city. So I put a compost bin out in the street. That was probably my first radical move. And I planted a tree, a tube stock tree, a scribbly gum, and some parsley around it, which I can tell you was an excellent trick, because people like things they know.
Yes.
People know parsley. And then I tested the waters, and we had a Christmas
party. So this was
party.
On public land that you're doing this planting?
What a lovely question. We have it. Yes, the answer is yes.
Public parsley.
We have public parsley. So I think generally in Australia we don't do that interface between public and private very well, and I think it's a space that needs to be optimised. I guess I think it's a great opportunity, and I think there's a lot of mowing of verges that has been happening as a way of putting care actually into these spaces, but we can do a lot better.
So the mowing of verges is usually people feeling obliged, isn't it? Or actually being obliged, perhaps. But you're trying to encourage them to do something a bit more creative. Is that right?
It's a little bit right, and I'd love to sit here and tell you that I've empowered the whole street to become great gardeners, and they're all out there every day. Sadly, they're not. I've got a real gardening thing going. I've always liked it. I'm one of 8 kids. I was one that got the gardening sort of thing. Other people in the family got other things.
We love gardening.
Like sport and animals and music, etc. I'm the garden guy.
Yep.
So I garden the street, to put that quite bluntly, but it sets up this reciprocal relationship stuff. So it's a very community build endeavour. That did have there was some purpose in that.
So would you kind of go to people and say, do you mind if I plant some parsley in your front lawn or something? Or not really?
Yeah, no, look, my mum flattered me when I was about 10 and she gave me some praise, and it's probably a good age to get praise.
Yeah.
And I've probably been inspired by praise ever since. So I did the compost heap. I planted a tree, and I planted a tree because a renting neighbour, a Scottish lovely bloke, agreed that'd be a great idea, he said in his lovely accent. And he just encouraged me, and that's all it needed. I thought, right, I'm going to do it. And then one sits back and sees you get told off a little bit. And having a street party is good because no one holds back. And instead of getting told off, I was able to encourage conversations like, I'm happy to put one in yours, or I'm happy to plant some herbs in yours. And one thing leads to another, and it's a step-by-step, literally spatial, I could say inch by inch, but centimetre by centimetre, or patch by patch. Progression over the last 5 years, where I would say now we've got maybe 30 trees growing in the street, and we've got what I'd call a very enhanced understory that is dense, diverse, and what we really need is
verges,
flowering.
Talking about,
and on verges, and flowering across the year.
Yeah, lovely. So, I mean, you're probably familiar with Chippendale, which has done similar things. And Michael Mobbs has been a guest on the show, and I'm sure you know him and his work. And they've done lots of things, planting, even pomegranate trees and kind of fruiting and vegetables for people. Is it the same with you? People can go and harvest?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's very nice. I don't mean people come from far and wide, but we do get a few people that come and put their compost in the now 3 compost bins in the street. Lovely. And we have quite a diverse mix of both private housing as well as a larger 3 or 4 story or 5 story apartment. So there's, as well as a massive block, gosh, how could I forget it, of about 87 apartments at the end of Illawong Ave, which is a story unto itself. But there's many people there without garden spaces. So I think your general common garden herbs are just an excellent accompaniment to lots of endemic species. So that literally one is planting for humans and the more than humans. And I suppose that is what landscape architects are trying to do, and that is to build, create connection between people, place and ecology. So it's quite satisfying, I have to say. But I would also say anyone can do it. It really is. Take your own agency, get out there, just start it. You can't fail. You really can't. You're failing when somebody breaks a tree. I've had that. I've had neighbours who
That'd be a bit
act
sad.
by action. I don't get sad now. Honestly, I don't. It's just I've probably planted twice as many things as are in the ground now because urban life is threatening.
Yeah.
And there's always a renovation going on in the street. There's always a series of trucks. There's always a group of terrific fellas with terrific machines, and gosh, they're big, and they accidentally drive over things, and they pull footpaths up. Yeah. People are generally, I think, pretty caring. But again,
so,
sorry, you go.
I haven't been to your street because I'm just trying to imagine it. So I'm imagining
it's
a street full of sort of funny little bungalows and semi-detached and things like that, as Tamarama tends to be.
Yeah.
So it's not like, so there are those streets also in there are a few in Darlinghurst and Paddington and sort of Redfern where people have colonised the laneways, but mostly with pots, with things in pots, and some of them are magical, where it's actually becomes impossible to drive and you have to sort of walk, which is fabulous, and it makes people feel that this is a shared kind of room and a party space. Is that what it's like with your street now? Has it transformed that much?
You've described that really beautifully. I think it is a bit, actually. Yeah. It's really changed spatially. So instead of those little patches of lawn that are flat, it has a 3-dimensional quality about it. So it has variation. It has something flowering at your nose in November when the Angophora hispida really kicks off. And it has, things flowering at your feet through much of the year when the borage really goes off and it self-seeds. There's a lot of self-seeding things like fennel and nasturtiums and borage at the bottom of it, which just, they just provide delight. And I think providing delight at a street community level
is huge.
It's huge, and it's just a little spoonful of happiness, and it's small. It's small and modest, and it's nice.
So tell us, just going back to your childhood, I was enchanted by your description of having been praised at the age of 10. So what was your engagement with gardening at that age? What were you doing? Is it sort of the veggies for the family, or?
Look, it is a different era. Mum passed away last year at the age of 93. I'm number 6 out of 8 kids, and I was the last breeder. But we had, what was that? Almost a half-acre block in sunny South Perth, and it was already 50 or 60 years old as a garden. So when I came along, and that's 1968, in the 70s, 80s, I guess I'm prime gardening there as a young person and teen. I put a lot of love into that, let's be honest. It's taught me quite a lot. To just step back to that praise thing, I particularly remember Mum praising me for getting a jasmine in the ground to cover the outdoor loo. And, with 8 kids, life had been more rudimentary. So I suppose I brought an element of the decorative to the garden that perhaps had been missing amidst the sandpits and the cricket pitches. But
yes,
it does break my heart. Did break my heart, but I taught me a good lesson when the whole block was cleared about 2017 after Mum sold it. But it was a great lesson in public versus private, and it was very galvanising for me. For all the love one can put into a private garden, in the end, it is a piece of real estate, and it sells. And it's the seller's right to do whatever they want. And if they clear that, they can clear it. So it was goodbye to that 100 years of growth and wisteria and, all sorts of lovely gum trees, etc. But the only thing that remained were my street trees that I had planted.
So you did that even then?
Even then. Even then. So I got some, they're called butter gums, Eucalyptus lalei, that grow at the back of Perth in the Darling Range. And I see them now, and honestly, we put the leaves on Mum's coffin last year, which was, kind of circular and rather
lovely.
nice.
Yes.
And I went and picked camellias and roses from the street gardens nearby, which had been shared experiences with Mum when we were younger. So that was, very, it's a nice thing to do personally. But at a public level, I think to leave a legacy for any of us, if we can work in public space, and the verge is public space, I think it becomes much more powerful in the bigger global conversation of climate and a need for more ecology. Well, we know from a terrific study by Phil Thallis when he was working with Jane Irwin on the Barangaroo competition, that they were estimating the public space of Sydney CBD was about 40%. So that's not a bad measurement.
Right.
So for me, I just think there's 40% out there that at scale, if we changed it, we can kindly colonise all this gentle DDD that I've just made up.
Philip Thallis, who's also been a guest on the show at least a couple of times, I think. But that is an interesting fact, isn't it? That I think he says it's 40% is public space, or 40% is even streets. But he does point out too, as part of that conversation, that in any town, but that includes Sydney, the streets are the permanent spaces, and everything else can change. And this is almost what you're saying about gardens too. But it's interesting, isn't it, that most people probably would feel intimidated by public space and feel sort of empowered to do whatever they like in their own private space, garden-wise in particular. But in public space, they probably would feel disempowered. But you're saying it should be the other way around.
Yes, I'm saying, wouldn't it be great if it was the other way around? I think you're right. People do feel disempowered. Generally, people are fairly disconnected from the idea of growing things, I think, increasingly.
Although people love it, don't they?
People love it. Yeah. They really love it.
Nurturing things.
I don't know. The coolest, grooviest, youthiest people on our street are often the first ones to tell me that they're growing herbs, or they used it, picked something out of the street, or I don't know. I always find it quite touching, I have to say.
So you've mentioned to me in conversation too the pollination corridor project that you've been involved with. Just describe that briefly, if you would, because I think that's quite cool.
Sure. I'm lucky enough to work at 2 terrific institutions sessionally. So mostly at UNSW with very clever, wonderful people, but also sometimes at UTS. And through those avenues, I was involved with the pollination corridor research paper for the Alistair Swain Foundation. working with Chloe Walsh, who was also working on the Government Architect's Office Biodiversity in Place document at the same time. And she's at Hassel. And I have noticed they've just released another excellent document whose name is just so difficult for me to remember, but it's I'll get it, Wildlife Habitat Design in the Public Realm. It's something like that. It's just come out this year. But all three of those documents are pointing towards this need for thinking about corridors, thinking about connection, climate change, thinking about not just apex creatures like the powerful owl, which we adore, but I never see them, which we know can have a 4 to 40 kilometre sort of territory, depending on the kind of ecological habitat below it, the quality of it. But what gets called the lower food web. So your snail, your skink, your ladybird, your bee, all these lower food web creatures.
Lower food web, I like that.
It's cute. Now, I just was reading that in the Hassel document. It's just terrific because that's really key, because we're not going to have powerful owls if they've got nothing to eat.
Yes.
And whilst, generally through my teachings, we're able to work a little bit or collaborate and share ideas with councils, many of them. And speaking with the Greening Bushcare guy at Sydney City Council, apologies, I cannot remember his name, I was struck that they place powerful owl boxes out and around. It was tricky getting a mapping of that, where they all are. But it is interesting to think of the apex creatures in this way, and an intentional habitat creation of them. That's a box, it's a house. What are they going to eat? And are they going to eat a possum? Are they going to eat a rat? What's the rat going to, et cetera, go down the chain. So the more we as people can do our compost, can encourage the ants, encourage the lizards, we are really making an impact.
So that would that suggest? I mean, we're used to thinking of sort of koala corridors and those sorts of things, but what you're saying is sort of really an urban version of that we can think of our own streets as corridors and connections for all these little creatures that do all these magic things by way of supporting the bigger things, but also, of course, keeping us all alive, which is a thing. And that's quite beautiful as an idea, isn't it? That sort of connected web of streets and it seems to me that that's really what you're talking about with bringing ecology to a place.
And just acting consciously about it. In the research paper, we were very conscious to try and connect two big hunks of green space, Centennial Park and Moore Park, and just sort of map that out, what's possible. And those streets you were talking about in Surrey Hills before, or Chippendales, those potted streets are absolutely part of that.
So everyone should think of their street as a connection.
Absolutely.
Not just for cars, but for
So if everyone
creatures.
just sort of, just think of your whole street as a part of a much bigger corridor of a community.
It's lovely. That is also a very good place for us to stop for a short music break.
Yon's my privateer, see how trim she lies. To every man a lucky hand and every man a prize. I live to ride the ocean, the mighty world around. To take a little plunder and to hear the cannon sound. To lay with pretty women, to drink Madeira wine. Hear the rollers thunder on a shore that isn't mine. Privateer, oh, we will go. Privateer, yo. Privateer, we will go. People on your man of war are treated worse than scum. I'm no flogging captain, and by God I'll sail with some. Come with me to Barbary, we'll ply there up and down. not quite exactly in the service of the crown, to lay with pretty women, to drink my dear wine, to hear the rollers thunder on a shore that is in my private use.
That is a track called Redbud Tree by British guitarist and songwriter Mark Knopfler from an album that was called Privateering in 2012. I'm Elizabeth Farrelly with you on the Sydneyist at Eastside Radio on 89.7 FM, and I'm speaking with landscape architect and academic Patrick Franklyn about landscape. But the word itself, Patrick, is interesting to me, partly because I had a friend who was a very celebrated landscape architect in London years ago, and she used to get wild when people used the word landscape as a verb. And I used to think, why? But her reasoning was that landscape is a verb. The verb to landscape a property, or usually it's around a building, we're going to landscape around this, is kind of, it relegates nature to very much to second or third or fourth place after all the important things like buildings have happened. So it's a sort of wallpaper approach to landscape, I suppose. What's your view of that, and of how landscaping is done at that sort of bigger scale?
It's a good comment, and we've all got it. We've got a history, haven't we? There's a history. There's an aesthetic history and a colonial history, etc. And we cart it along, all of us. And so the aesthetics of the world around us have been typed in all sorts of ways, the picturesque, etc. And so the landscape is part of that, in landscape painting, of course. So as this profession, landscape architecture, has developed, really at its core, it's about creating relationships between those three things: people, place, and ecology. But yes, landscape is a more sort of static, decorative thing. It's kind of an easier product almost to understand, and so I agree with your friend in some ways. But look, landscape architecture is a verb too. Really, it's quite a doing, evolving thing. Landscaping as a set piece, or we've just been in Bali and I want to come back and I want to make my surroundings look like Bali, or my latest holiday place is. It's the commodification, I suppose, of the.
Yes.
Gosh, it's a big word, but it's it's the commodification of the scenographic, I think, is how that could get expressed, where we take a scene that we like, or a painting, and we rebuild it, we recreate it at its as a visual hierarchy, and we lose all the richness of our community connection, of our ecology possibilities.
So you mentioned Philip Thallis and Jane Irwin's scheme for Barangaroo, which was, for anyone who can't remember this complex history, but Philip Thallis and Jane Irwin and a number of others won the Barangaroo competition, an international competition, and then very controversially were sort of removed from the scene and replaced by Lend-Lease, really. But so let's have a quick chat about what the difference would have been if their competition winning scheme had been built. How would that have changed the place that you see at Barangaroo now, do you think?
It's a big, brave question there. Yeah. I don't know if I'm the right guy to have the big, brave answer to that. But Jane has talked to me about it, I have to say.
It was quite landscape sort of dominated, and the idea of public space as the primary space, as the main kind of figure in the space, intrigued me. And the buildings were I think the buildings were more or less fitting in around the streets.
Yeah. Look, there is a conversation out there that would suggest that landscape architects are a good profession to really lead some of these big-scale urban projects. Now, that can be a debated topic, for sure. But Jane and Phil's approach then, and I don't know it well, but I know it a little bit.
It's quite a long time ago now.
Yeah,
too.
It did centre more on landscape and landscape systems and those connections back of the streets, back into the city.
So how would the world look different, do you think, if we were able to prioritise public space, and especially public space as a kind of nature corridor, if you like, as a sort of connection to bring the natural world into our lives? How would that change, I suppose, our domestic lives, but also our working lives? What would the place be like?
I'm going to speak into a visual that comes to mind immediately, which we were just working on Chatswood with our master's students at UNSW, and some of the approaches coming out of there.
Chatswood.
So
I don't connect Chatswood with nature.
No, but
maybe that's my...
It's above Scott's Creek, actually. Scott's Creek's been channelled and put right underneath it, and behind the very large car park of Westfield that council actually own and rent to Westfield is actually a terrific sequence of publicly owned spaces that have been vegetated with high blue gum forest trees, many of them, that connects for about a kilometre, something like 800 metres or something. And we were asking our students to stitch them together a bit. Now, the braver students charged that onto the street, and all of that was happening at the same time as a need to develop. So whilst we had proposals that were putting far greater density of mid to high-rise buildings, small and narrow, well, narrow and thin, sorry, not small and narrow, thin and narrow.
Yeah, thin footprints.
And allowing the northern sunlight in. Thank you to Benjamin Driver for leading some of that kind of conversation. But we saw the main streets suddenly having a wider footpath, having above creeks resurfaced, daylighted, I suppose, is the term that gets used, and traffic slowing down. So once you slow traffic down, and you can put parking perhaps underneath a new development, you release a lot of space. And I think this spatial reality of our cities has been dominated by the car. So the very wonderful Go Get guys, Nick and Bruce, and their founding of that terrific business, that has always been partly a game of trying to release space about cars and parked cars. So the more we can all play this game, and it is a game, and we have to rethink the space around us. And I guess I'm trying to do that with verges, but in a bigger urban level, how we rethink our streets, what they can be, how we slow traffic down, how we have shared spaces, multiple-use spaces becomes really key.
And of course the spin-offs from that sort of thinking are huge. There's, shade and urban cooling from extra canopy, but there's also biodiversity, and there's also just the fact that people love green things, and people are happier and nicer when they're near green things. So let's talk about the question of legacy, and because that's really important too, isn't it? I think it's something we tend to forget, is the longevity, the kind of longitudinal, I guess, aspect of gardening. As you say, some gardens can be destroyed, but also they grow and change and move and become different. So how should we think about that for the future?
Professor Leon van Schaik was always influential to me down in Melbourne at RMIT, and I do remember him saying...
He's amazing, Leon.
He is amazing. Him saying something, if you have a public project that lasts longer than 10 years, you're doing pretty well. And we watched Burke Street Mall get redone and redone. I have got a couple of public projects down in Melbourne that have lasted kind of more than 10 years but been changed. But the idea of legacy and what we do and why we do it and if it matters becomes increasingly key, particularly the older I get. So the getting a tree in the ground that's going to stay there, let's say for 100 years rather than for 10, becomes very significant to me. And I think, we back to those powerful owls, they don't mind an old dead tree to house themselves in. So this idea of having age amidst our streets also ties into this for legacy. So
in 30 seconds that we've got left, 20 seconds maybe, what advice would you give to communities who want to turn their street, in your terms, into a sort of series of paddocks or a corridor of biodiversity?
Check out my Instagram when I get it going. It's called On The Verge. And here's 3 things I think you could do. Assess what you've got in front of you. Where's the opportunities? Act would be the second thing I'd say. And then get some feedback. Have a street party and see what your neighbours think.
Wonderful. I'm Elizabeth Farrelly. I've been speaking with landscape architect and academic Patrick Franklyn about gardening as shared purpose. This episode will be available on our website, and I'm going to have to leave you now because Sophie is cutting my throat. Good night. We'll see you next week.